Hello, my name is Mrs. Darling, and I'm going to be starting off with Chapter 1, titled Peter Bakes Through. All children, except one, grow up. They know as soon as they will grow up. And the way Wendy knew was this. One day she was 2 years old, and she was playing in the garden. She plucked another flower and ran it to me. I was rather delightful, and I put my hand to my heart and cried, "Why can't you remain like this forever?" And this was all that had passed between us on the subject. And henceforth, Wendy knew from that day that she must grow up. You always know after you are 2. 2 is the beginning of the end. Now, of course, we lived at 14, our house number on the street, and until Wendy came, I was the chief one. I was once a lovely lady, with a romantic mind and a sweet mocking mouth. My romantic mind was like the tiny boxes, one within the other, that come from the puzzling East. However many you discover, there is always one more. That sweet mocking mouth had just one kiss on it, and one that Wendy would never get, though there it was, perfectly conspicuous, in the right-hand corner. Now the way Mr. Darling won me was this. Many gentlemen who had been boys when I was a young girl discovered simultaneously that they all loved me, and so they all ran to my house to propose to me, except Mr. Darling, who took a cab and nipped in first, and so he got me. He got all of me, except for my innermost box and the kiss. He never knew about the box, and in time he gave up trying for that kiss. Mr. Darling used to boast to Wendy that I not only loved him, but respected him. He was one of those deep ones who knows about stocks and shares. Of course, no one really knows, but he quite seemed to know, and he often said stocks were up and shares were down, in a way that would have made any woman respect him. I was married in white, and at first I kept the books perfectly, almost gleefully, as if it were a game. Not so much as a Brussels sprout was missing, and by, whole cauliflowers dropped out, and instead there were pictures of babies without faces. I drew them when I should have been totting up. First came Wendy, then John, then Michael. For a week or 2 after Wendy came, it was doubtful of whether we would be able to keep her, as she was another mouth to feed. Mr. Darling was frightfully proud of her, but he was also very honorable, and he sat on the edge of my bed, holding my hand, and calculating expenses, when I looked up at him imploringly. I wanted to risk it, come what may. But this was not his way. His way was with pencil and a piece of paper, and if I confused him with suggestions, he would have to begin at the beginning again. "Now don't interrupt," he would beg of me. "I have £1.17 here and 2.6 at the office. I can cut out my coffee at the office, say 10 shillings, make 2, 9, and 6, and your 18 and 3 makes 397, and 5 ought in my checkbook, which makes 897, and who is that moving? 897 dot and carry the 7, don't speak. My own, and the pound you lent to the man who came at the door. Oh, quiet, child. Dot and carry, child. There, you've done it. Did I say 997? Yes, I said 997. The question is, can we try it for a year on 997? Of course we can, George, I cried, but I was prejudiced in Wendy's favor, and he really the grander character of us. Now remember, Mum, remember, mumps. He warned me almost threateningly, and off he went again. Mumps, £1. I'll have to put that down. And dare I say, it will be more like 30 shillings. Don't speak. Measles, 1 5. German measles, half a guinea. Makes 2 15 6. Don't waggle your finger. Whooping cough, say 15 shillings. And so on it went. And it added up differently every time. But at last, Wendy just got through, and with mumps reduced to 12 6. And the two kinds of measles were treated as one. There was the same excitement over John, and Michael had an even narrower squeak, but both were kept, and soon you might have seen the three of them going in a row to Mrs. Folsom's kindergarten school, accompanied by their nurse. I loved to have everything just so, and Mr. Darling had a passion for being exactly like his neighbor, so of course we had a nurse. As we were quite poor in some instances, though, owing to the amount of milk the children drank, this nurse was a prime Newfoundland dog named Nana, who helped to no one in particular until we engaged her. She had always thought the children important. However, we had become acquainted with her in Kensington Gardens, where she spent most of her spare time peeping into prams, and was much hated by the careless nursemaids, whom she would follow to their homes and complain of to their mistresses. She proved to be quite a treasure of a nurse. How thorough she was at bath time, and up at any moment of the night if one of her charges made the slightest cry. Of course, her kennel was in the nursery. She had a genius for knowing when a cough is a thing to have no patience for, or with one that needed stocking around your throat. She believed that, to her last day, in old-fashioned remedies such as rhubarb leaf, and made sounds of contempt over all this newfangled talk about germs, and so on. It was a lesson in propriety to see her escorting the children to school, walking steadily by their side when they were well behaved, and butting them back into line if they strayed. Now, on John's football days, she never once forgot his sweater, and she would occasionally carry an umbrella in her mouth in case of rain. There was a room in the basement of Mrs. Folsom's school while the nurses wait, and they sat on forms while Nana laid on the floor. But that was the only difference. They affected to ignore her as an inferior social status to themselves, and she despised their light talk. She resented visits to the nursery from our friends, but if they did come, she first whipped off Michael's pinafore and put him in one with the blue braiding, and would smooth out Wendy and made a dash at John's hair. No nursery could possibly have been conducted more correctly, and Mr. Darling knew it, yet sometimes he wondered uneasily whether the neighbors talked. He had his position in the city to consider. Nana also troubled him in another way. He had sometimes a feeling that she did not admire him. Now, I know she admires you tremendously, George, I would assure him, and then I would sign to the children to be especially nice to their father. Lovely dances followed, which the only other servant, Eliza, would sometimes be joining in as well. Such a tiny little thing she looked in her long skirt and a maid's cap, and though she had sworn when engaged that she would never see 10 again. The gaiety of those romps, and the happiest of all was me, who would pirouette so wildly that all you could see of me was the kiss. And then, if you had dashed at me, you might have just got it, for there was never a simpler and happier family until the coming of Peter Pan. Now, I'd first heard of Peter when I was tidying up my children's minds. It was a nightly custom that every good mother, after her children are asleep, to rummage into their minds and put things straight for the next morning, repacking into their proper places the many articles that have wandered about throughout the day. If you could keep awake, but of course you can't, you would see your own mother doing this, and you would find it very interesting to watch her. It's like tidying up drawers. You would see her on her knees, I expect, lingering humorously over all of your contents, wondering where on earth you picked up this thing, making discoveries sweet and not so sweet, pressing this to her cheek as if it were nice as a kitten, and then hurrying, storing it out of sight. When you wake in the morning, the naughtiness and evil passions which you went to bed have been folded up, small, and placed at the bottom of your mind, and on top, beautifully aired, are spread out your prettiest thoughts, ready for you to put on. Now, I don't know whether you have seen a map of a person's mind. Doctors sometimes draw maps of other parts of you, and your own map can become intensely interesting. But catch them trying to draw a map of a child's mind, which is not only confused, but it keeps going round all the time. Of course, the maps I'm referring to are drawings that the children would draw, and they would draw a bit of Neverland. Now, of course, the Neverlands varied a good deal. John's, for instance, had a lagoon with flamingos flying over it, at which John was shooting, while Michael, who was very small, had a flamingo with lagoons flying over it. John lived in a boat turned upside down on the sands, and Michael in a wingham. Wendy in a house of leaves deftly sewed together. John had drawn no friends. Michael would have friends at night. And Wendy had a pet wolf, forsaken by its parents. But on the whole, the Neverlands did have a family resemblance. And if they stood still in a row, you could say that they each have each other's nose, and so forth. On those magical shores, children at play are forever breaching their simple boats. We too have been there. We can still hear the sound of the surf, though we shall land no more. Of all delicate islands, the Neverland is the snuggiest and most compact, not large and sprawly, with tedious distances between one adventure and the next, but nicely crammed. Whenever you play at it, by day, with chairs and the tablecloths, it is not as the least bit alarming, but in the 2 minutes before you go to sleep, it becomes very real, and that is why there are nightlights. Occasionally, in my travels through my children's minds, I would find things I could not understand, and of these, quite the most perplexing was the word Peter. I knew of no Peter, and yet here he was, there in John and Michael's minds, while Wendy began to scrawl all over him. The name stood out in bolder letters than any other word, and I gazed, and I felt it was an oddly cocky appearance. Yes, he is rather cocky, Wendy would admit with regret, as I had been questioning her. But who is he, my pet? Oh, he's Peter Pan, Mother. You know. At first I did not know, but after thinking back to my childhood, I just remembered a Peter Pan who was said to live with the fairies. And there were odd stories about him, as that when sometimes young children died, he went part of the way with them so that they should not be frightened. I had believed it him at the time, but now that I was married and full of sense, I quite doubted whether there was such a person. Besides, I assured Wendy, he would be grown up by this time. Oh no, he isn't grown up, Wendy assured me confidently. And he is just my size. She meant that he was her size, both in mind and body. She didn't know how she knew, she just knew it. I consulted Mr. Darling, and he simply smiled and said, "Pooh-pooh, mark my words," he said. "There is some nonsense Nana has been putting into their heads. Just the sort of an idea a dog would have. Leave it alone and it will blow over." But it would not blow over, and soon that troublesome boy gave me quite a shock. You see, children have these strangest adventures without being troubled by them. And it was in this casual way that Wendy one morning made a disquieting revelation. There were some leaves of a tree found on the floor of the nursery, which certainly had not been there when the children went to bed. And as I puzzled over them, Wendy said with a tolerant smile, "Oh, I do believe it was that Peter again." "Whatever do you mean, Wendy?" "Well, it is so naughty of him not to wipe his feet," Wendy said, sighing. She was always a tidy child. She explained in quite a matter-of-fact way that she thought Peter sometimes came to the nursery in the night and sat on the foot of her bed and played his pipes to her. Unfortunately, she never woke, so she didn't know how she knew. But she just knew. "What nonsense you talk of, Precious! No one can get into the house without knocking." "Well, I think he comes in by the window," she said. "My love, we are 3 floors up." "But were the leaves not at the foot of the window, Mother?" It was quite true. The leaves had been found near the window. I did not know what to think, for it all seemed so natural to Wendy that you could not dismiss it by saying she must have been just dreaming. "My child," I cried, "why did you not tell me this before?" "I forgot," said Wendy lightly, and she hurried to get to her breakfast. Surely she must have been dreaming. But on the other hand, there were the leaves. I examined them very carefully. They were skeleton leaves, but I was sure they did not come from any tree that grew in England. I crawled about the floor, peering at it with a candle for marks of a strange foot. I rattled the poker up the chimney and tapped the walls. I let down a tape from the window to the pavement, and there was surely a 30-foot drop, without so much as a sprout or a tree to climb up. Certainly Wendy had to have been dreaming. But Wendy had not been dreaming. And as the next night showed, the night on which the extraordinary adventures of these children may have, is said to have begun. On this night we speak of, the children were all in bed once more. I happened to be in the nursery myself, as it was Nana's day off. So I bathed them, sung to them, until one by one they let go of my hand and slid off into the land of sleep. All were looking so safe and cozy, and I smiled at my fears now, and I sat down by the fire to sew. It was something for Michael, whose birthday was getting. The fire was warm, however, and the nursery dimly lit by the 3 night lights. Presently the sewing laid on my lap, and I laid my head oh so graciously, and I fell asleep. You can just see the 4 of us, Wendy and Michael over there, John there, and I here by the fire. There should have been a fourth nightlight. For while I slept, I had a dream. I dreamt of the Neverland that had come too near, and that a strange boy had broken through from it. He did not alarm me, for I thought I had seen him before in the faces of many women who have no children. Perhaps he is to be found in the faces of some mothers as well. But in my dream, he had ripped through the film that obscures the Neverland, and I saw Wendy, John, and Michael were peering through the gap. The dream by itself would have been a trifle, but while I was dreaming, the window of the nursery blew open, and the boy did drop on the floor. He was accompanied by a strange light, no bigger than your fist, which darted around the room like a living thing. And I think it must have been this light that had awakened me. I woke up with a start, and I saw the boy. Somehow I knew at once that he was Peter Pan. Now if you, or Wendy, or John, or Michael had been there, you would have seen that he was very much like my kiss. He was a lovely boy, clad in skeleton leaves and the germs that oozes out of trees. But the most entrancing about him was that he still had all of his first baby teeth. And when he saw me and saw that I was a grown-up, he gashed those little pearls right at me. Unfortunately, my darlings, that is the end of chapter 1. But I will join you again shortly for chapter 2. Until then, rest well, my darlings. Stay safe.